Well, this morning we're going to talk a little bit about doors. I don't know if you've ever thought about what is the purpose of doors. Well, mostly it's to keep stuff out. They keep the weather out, animals out, intruders out, unwanted solicitors out. Doors are a wonderful idea. They've been around for a long, long time. Now here's a little quiz for you. How many doors would you guess there are going to be in our new building? All right, not counting like closet doors or whatever. Tell someone sitting next to you how many doors you think there's going to be in the new building. Just tell somebody and maybe come up with it in your mind or whatever. All right, got a number? All right, the correct answer is 13. An unlucky 13 number of doors. And doors are found all throughout the Bible. In John 10, verse 9, Jesus said, "I am the door." In Revelation 3:20, he said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." In Matthew 7, verse 7, Jesus said, "Knock, and the door will be open." Now, the Apostle Paul, who wrote the book of Romans, often used this metaphor as a door in his writings in the New Testament. But most of the time, when Paul used this term, we find him agonizing over people or cities or countries whose doors were closed to Christianity. And not just closed, but oftentimes closed and bolted, dead bolted shut. Time after time, Paul would travel to a city. He would start to spread the news about Jesus Christ, and people would either simply ignore him, or in some cases, they would oppose him, arrest and even beaten and imprison him. And sometimes he would be thrown outside the gates of the city, and then they would close the doors on him. And Paul would pick himself up, and he would move on to the next city. In all but a few isolated cases, the Apostle Paul spent his entire ministry life trying to advance the cause of Christ in the face of closed doors. Sometimes he even had a prayer like the one in Colossians 4:3. He says, "Pray that God would open up a door to the gospel message." Paul was kind of saying, just once in my life before I die, I would like to tell people about Christ and not get jailed or stoned for it. Just once, I would like to find people whose hearts were receptive. Paul could barely imagine what it would be like to serve God in a setting where there were open doors. Now, I bring this up because for all of us here at this church, we find ourselves in an era, we find ourselves in a country and in a situation that Paul went to his grave only being able to dream about. And as we enter the spring of 2017, before us is a huge open door because of our much more visible building that we're moving to soon. Sometimes we kind of need to be reminded, that this hasn't happened that often in kingdom history. Throughout the centuries, in most places and times, believers have encountered great resistance in their efforts to do God's work. But for reasons only heaven knows, we live in a place, we live in a time where the doors of opportunity are really wide open. Well, today we come to the end of a long journey through the New Testament book of Romans. We started it clear back in September, and here we are finishing it in February. And I was thinking, as I was looking at this, how hard it is sometimes to measure how much you get out of a particular series. We've been in this thing for like 5 months. I mean, can you remember even the titles of some of my talks? Probably not. Here's how I think it works. Here are some of the series we've done over the past few years. That represents probably a couple of hundred talks that many of you were here for most of them. But sometimes what you learned or what you gained from it or how you grew from it, kind of hard to measure. But I'm totally convinced of this. There are many people today who call themselves Christians, consider themselves sometimes to be very devout believers, but they kind of don't attend church. They rarely, if ever, attend church. Well, I can guarantee you that if you were here for most of these series the last few years, your mind and your spirit and your heart and your soul have been fed and nourished by Bible intake that you've had infinitely more than believers who haven't had that exposure, who kind of blow off church. And each Sunday is kind of like another brick in the wall. You learn something, you gain something, you're inspired, you're challenged, and over time it starts to build up, it starts to stack up, and pretty soon it becomes something really strong. And 5 or 10 years down the road, the Christian who has expose themselves to God's word again and again and again. I mean, in 10 years, 50 Sundays a year, or however many you might, that's 450 to 500 times a year. And the person who is absorbing all of that, from God's word, are going to be way further down the road of spiritual development than someone who calls themselves a believer and is not exposing themselves regularly to input from God's word. So I want to commend all of you for being here, many of you week after week, month after month, and some of you year after year. And as we come to the final week of our Romans series, we have 2 verses that we're going to look at. And in both cases, one at the beginning in chapter 1, the other toward the end in chapter 15, Paul is talking about reaching out to people who are far from God. He says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. And then at the end he says, it's always been my ambition or my call to preach the gospel where Christ was not already known. Now we know that Jesus cared about people who needed God. And I think it's no accident that in Matthew chapter 28, when Jesus is giving his final instructions to his followers just before he ascended back into heaven, his last words on earth that he wanted to leave ringing in his disciples' ears was, go. Go out and spread the message of salvation. Do everything you can to take my message around the world. Reach people who need God. And this value that spiritually lost people matter to God was passed on from Christ to his followers. In the book of Acts, we don't find the early Christians hiding out in caves for fear of their lives. We don't find them forming little holy huddles of self-protection. Rather, we see them boldly taking the message that regardless of who you are, regardless of what your past has been, whatever mistakes you've made, you still matter to God. That's what they did. That's what they communicated. They were not a self-absorbed, closed group. Instead, they reached out, extending open arms and open doors and open hearts to everybody who needed God. Now, unfortunately, down through the centuries, the church by and large has gravitated much more towards catering to the already converted, almost to the exclusion of reaching out to sinners. And if there's one thing that I've been misunderstood and criticized for over the years, it's ironically that I try to take seriously this matter that lost people matter to God, and therefore they should matter to the church. Many of you have perhaps seen advertisements for many churches that are starting up these days. Churches starting up all the time, and they sound a lot like the Seeker Church. Contemporary music, casual dress, live band, not as good as ours, but live band. In fact, even some traditional churches these days are adding a contemporary service where they replace the pipe organ with, guitars and so forth. But there still is a fundamental difference between most of them and us, and that is that most of them are still designed primarily for, if not exclusively for, people who are already believers. And these days, a lot of Christians prefer casual dress over suit and ties. They prefer a live band over choirs and worship songs over hymns. In other words, being contemporary doesn't necessarily make a church outreach-oriented. Now, I'm not saying that I think we're better than other churches by any means, but we do try to take seriously Jesus' vision that his church should care about people who are far from God. However, over the past several years, our doors, by and large, have been closed to most people because we're invisible to them. They can't see us. They don't know we're here. But that is getting ready to change. Our new place is at a highly visible location, one of the most recognizable intersections in town. If you tell somebody, yeah, we're right at the corner of Robinson and Northbury Road, they're going to know where that is. And thousands of people drive by every day. And the door of opportunity for us to reach more people who are far from God is going to be more open for us than ever before. It's interesting in Matthew chapter 28, which I referenced a moment ago, when Jesus told the order to go and make disciples. The word he used, go, translated, is actually in the present participle in the original Greek language, and it means going. In other words, while you are going, spread the message. While you're going to work, while you're going to school, while you're going shopping, while you're going to work out or to one of your kids' activities, you don't have to become a missionary in some foreign country to spread the message. Just right where you work, in your family, among your circle of friends and acquaintances, each one of us has opportunities to build relationships with people who are far from God, people who need Christ, many who are kind of going through the motions of life, trying to find happiness, trying to find love or purpose or community, people who sometimes feel like there's something missing in their life. And we have the opportunity to invite them to come. God is granting us, me and you, God is granting us with new open doors of opportunity. The question is, what will we do with it? Now let me take a moment to clarify something. I've been in Norman since 1977, and never once have I said our goal is to be the biggest church in town, or our goal is to have the biggest and best facilities or building in town. In fact, I've said pretty much the opposite. I've said many times it's not about being the biggest. It's not about a building. It's about reaching out to people who are far from God. Now there's more to our vision than that, but that's a big part of it. But a part of, we're going to talk about our whole vision in the next 3 weeks in our series, Our Core Values. And a lot of our core values we have been able to do right here in this place, buried back here where people can't see us. Like teaching the Bible. We've been doing that. Loving each other. We've been doing that. Serving God. Caring about people who are hurting. We've done some outreach through our missions, and so forth that we support. But reaching more people locally has been tough. Because, no one can see us or find us. Well, that part is about ready to change. But only if you and I will take advantage of this new door of opportunity that God is finally opening up to us. How do we do it? I think you can encapsulate it in 2 words. Invite and include. Invite and include. Christianity is an invitation-dependent faith. It always has been. You remember when Andrew began to follow Jesus, one of the first things he does is go to his brother Peter, invite him to come and check Jesus out. Philip does the same thing with his friend Nathanael. Because both Andrew and Philip knew that if they could just get Peter and Nathanael to a place where they could, see Jesus and interact with Jesus and learn from Jesus, they knew that they would be hooked. But, and this is a big but the whole thing breaks down if we don't do what they did and invite people to come. Because after doing this for a long time, I found that very few people who are disconnected from God suddenly wake up on Sunday morning and say, I think I'll go to church today. That doesn't happen often. They usually need to be invited by a friend or a family member. And more of them will come than you might think. In a George Barna national poll, 25% of unchurched people said that they would be willing to visit a church if invited by a friend or someone they trusted. Not 25% of Christians who currently don't attend church anywhere or who are disgruntled with their church, but 1 in 4 people who are not even believers at all. Don't ever estimate the power of a simple invitation. Now everybody here, all of us know of people who are not yet Christ followers. They just don't have God in their lives in a real way. Well, the fact is that most of us come into contact every week with a sizable number of people like that. At work, at school, friends, neighbors, family members, where we go work out. And the idea is for you and I to be very intentional about those doors of opportunity where God could use you. God could use you to touch someone's life, and maybe eventually God could change their eternity. And it all happens through a simple invitation. And I think the best and easiest way to do that is by giving people one of our new invitation cards. Now, we can't use them yet because the map on the back is for our new location. But when we move, we're going to give these out, and they're really, really great to invite people to come. And there are so many ways you can use these cards. For instance, you can leave one, for your waiter at a restaurant. With your bill or your money. Got to leave a good tip. Don't leave a bad tip and then put a card there. That's not good. Leave a good tip. If at work, if everybody has like a mail slot, you could put some in some people's mail slots. You could slide one under the doors of somebody in the OU dorm. You could go into like a public restroom and you unroll the toilet roll deal and you put one in there. All right, someone's unrolling the thing and out pops one of our cards. They're going to go, this is a sign from God for sure. You know, you can give one to somebody you work with or go to school or neighbors. Give one to the person who cut your hair. You know how some people have on their desk at work a little card holder and it has their business card in there. Well, put some of these in there. People will make, what's that? And you go, oh, it's, you know, and you invite them. When you get gas, you can leave one sticking out of that place where people put their credit card. So when they go to put their credit card down, they go, oh, what's this? See? When you go to the mall, you can leave one in the dressing room, put one in a pair of shoes that you try on. The next person gets it, they're just going to think, man. When you pay your City of Norman or pay the City of Moore water bill, put one in there with your check. When you're done with your transaction at the bank drive-thru, leave one in that little plastic canister deal. I could go on and on. There's all kinds of ways to do it. But invite. And then the include part simply means to be friendly and inclusive of new people to the church. Now, don't be like this guy. You know, you don't want to be weird or obnoxious or too much, but just be nice to people. You know, if you don't invite somebody one week, well, you see somebody that you don't know, that go up and go, hi, I'm so-and-so. I don't think we've met yet. You could say, hey, we're going to have a free, you know, potluck lunch. If you want to stick around, you could sit with us. Just make people feel welcome. Make them feel wanted. You could think of our Sunday services as 52 opportunities a year where a whole team of singers and musicians and children's teachers and greeters and tech people and other people have invested many hours to prepare an experience that can assist you in reaching people that matter to you. People in your workplace, family members, people who need God. All you have to do is get them here, and God will take it from there. Doors of opportunity that have been closed to us for years are about to open up wide. I hope you're excited about it. I hope we all commit ourselves to making the most of this opportunity.